The werewolf was well known in antiquity, and the Greeks and Romans seemed especially fascinated with the concept of a human canine blend. The Roman poet Ovid, which is fine, I have a compilation of his book of stories, born in 43 BC, told the story of the evil king Lycan, whom god Zeus or Jupiter transformed into a wolf after the king sneakily served him human flesh at a banquet. Man, talking about the revenge, right? Lycan's name eventually morphed into the word lycanthropy or lycanthropy. Today, the term means any condition of werewolfism, from a psychological disorder that causes the afflicted to believe they have turned into wolves, to actual human to wolf transformation that some people believe is possible through magic, spirit helpers, astral body doubles, or other extra mundane means. The idea of the human and animal mashup predates even the Greeks and Romans, however, as far back as 6500 BC, an ancient settlement in the area of the present day Turkey called, okay, you have to be graceful with me, it's called Çatalhöyük, featured wall paintings of priests costumed as vultures. Within 3,500 years of the founding of that Turkish settlement, the ancient Egyptians had begun to portray their deities with the heads of animals such as the jackal god Anubis, mentioned later in this book. Okay, let's take a short break.
Wow,
Dane,
I
do
didn't
you
know that
find
about
this?
the Catal Çatalhöyük. Why does that
Mhm.
sound like Cthulhu and
Oh,
look
that's
like Cthulhu?
interesting. Yeah, but I was just about to make that reference, not with Cthulhu necessarily, but do you see how from different mythologies and people groups and civilizations they had similar stories, yet they were separated by long distances? Uh,
Yeah,
it always fascinates me when we see stories not of this sort, any stories like let's go with the flood, or let's go with the giants, or let's see with the
yeah,
wolf, with the winged lions, and any type of different weird stories or creatures. Whenever I
yeah,
see stories being repeated into different ancient civilizations who never were in touch with each other, it always tells me like, well, there could be something more than just mere legend. So I just wanted to ask you, for you as a seminary biblical and theology student, would you agree with this?
yeah. I totally agree with that, and I kind of put that in basically two categories. Well, first of all, if they didn't have access to, if the cultures did not have access to each other, then you have to ask yourself, how did they come up with similar ideas? And then after that, it makes me think, well, there's something spiritual behind it that's common. So some of these spirits and entities can have personalities per se, and one can recognize the personalities come through in the different cultures as well as even in interacting with them. Like if you're a demonologist or something, and you're in deliverance work, you can actually recognize a common personality across different names and things like that. But one interesting thing I was reading the other day was, so I was reading about H.P. Lovecraft and the story of his you know just his life. And there's this book, The Cult of the Alien Gods, and we've talked about that book before. And in that book, it goes through H.P. Lovecraft's early days and through his career, and other authors and things that have interacted with him. And there's this one guy, I think his name is Howard something. I can't remember his name just off the top of my head, but there was an author around. I think this was around the 1930s, and H.P. Lovecraft supposedly didn't know anything about this guy. And as you know, H.P. Lovecraft, you may or may not know, people may or may not know, he came up with a Cthulhu, um, god or character in his books. And it's spelled, how's it spelled, Nicola? Cthulu.
ULU.
Okay. And
Mm.
so, anyways, he got a hold of this guy, or he found something, the story this guy had written. Let's call him Howard. I could be getting the name wrong. And he came up with a mythology almost identical to um, H.P. Lovecraft. But the name of one of his monsters was something like Cthulhu, spelled with a K and a little bit different. It's in this book I'm talking about. I didn't come prepared with this information, but anyways, in response to your question, they didn't know about each other, and yet they came up with a very similar mythology, even down to the names. And so this makes me think, well, maybe there's just something about living in the same time period, given, the history of the world and the various literary works that existed before us and everything that we're exposed to in our same culture. And then that they came up with, the same type of mythology. And I have to believe it's the same in ancient times. Ancient Israel, there's a lot of parallels. And you mentioned the flood story, and some other stories, the creation story. And so it makes me wonder, maybe there's a mix of just commonality of just living in the same era, and everything that people are exposed to. But then also, there's probably they had contact with each other maybe sometimes. But on top of all that, it makes me think maybe there's a common spiritual force kind of behind that. And then through the ages, because if we can identify personalities in these different gods that have different names and different cultures, but the same personality traits, it starts to make me wonder, is this a spiritual thing, behind the scenes?
Yeah, thank you for that. By the way, I just want to correct myself. When I said that it's spelled with ULU, it's ULHU. So it's
Mm-hmm.
CTHULHU, Cthulhu.
Okay.
Yeah, and what
Yeah.
is fascinating, because I bumped into the book, which I mean, but the audience doesn't know, Necronomicon from 1980, and I was like, I'm not dealing with this because it's the whole book is very satanic and with spells, but I wanted to read the introduction because it gave me a lot of information, even if some is false. But at least when it comes from their own camp, satanic, they were like saying how Lovecraft's material was connected with Aleister Crowley's, with Sumerian
Mm-hmm.
mythology, and it was basically all this combo of everything. It's not a mere horror like maybe, let's say, Stephen King does. This was an occultic horror. And I
Mm-hmm.
was just reading in their introduction how they were breaking down some very old ancient Sumerian words, how they had something like Cthulhu, differently spelled, but very very similar, and it was a deity. It was a cosmic
Mm-hmm.
evil deity, and I was like, dang it! So Lovecraft did not invent this
Mm-hmm.
God with small g, right?
Yeah.
Sure, he added some different elements, but the skeleton was there thousands of years before Lovecraft. So
Yeah.
that's interesting, but also kind of scary because
Yeah.
he, I mean, you can see this depressive, dreadful anticipation of nothingness. It's like it's
Oh.
hopelessness. There's not God like in a um, uh, like a hero, divine hero figure like Christ coming to conquer Cthulhu, right? Like you're
Mm.
hopeless. Like just face it, you're gonna die, and you're gonna die with miserable death of this cosmic evil deity.
Yeah.
So that's interesting how from different civilization to another civilization, this myth prevailed. As like I said, with flood, with giants, or like with this wolfmen or
Yeah.
werewolves or vampires and different demonic entities. I perfectly agree with you with your conclusion. There most probably there's this spiritual entity, spiritual background that was
Mm-hmm.
exposing themselves to the peoples of antiquity, and just
Mm-hmm.
revealing some truth that's very important. So people were
Mm-hmm.
adoring and worshiping these entities.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, and with all the divination practices that were so common in these ancient cultures, where they're reading the entrails, or they know how the liver is supposed to look, and that's going to tell you something about what's going to happen in the future. And then you have First Enoch, of course. Again, I think we talked about that last time, where the Watchers came and taught uh, technology to the people, and so there's contact there, and that's preternatural contact. It's because they took on flesh, um, and it just makes you wonder. I mean, there's so many parallels between all this ancient stuff and then what's happening kind of around the fringes of society with the paranormal, in our time. And it's just there's got to be either a human, it's a common human experience, you know, or it's a paranormal or spiritual experience, or both, um, and psychological probably as well. And because it's often, I think it's true that often psychology and spirituality mix to afflict us in the flesh as well as in the spirit. It's not always just a physical problem or only a spiritual problem. It's often, both. And so that brings you to the idea that you can have a werewolf that's a demon or something take on flesh, and you can see it. It's wet in the rain and you can see the water dropping off of it. I mean, it's physical. It's not an apparition. And so, yeah, it's just really strange.
Yeah, I would
That's
just add
actually,
one sentence. I would agree. I think that people who are spiritually and mentally or psychologically healthy, uh, they'll be much less prone to be deceived spiritually, and to
mm,
think they're a werewolf, or to maybe think I'm a vampire or something. If they're healthy in their mind,
yeah,
in their brain, they would resist such an opinion. Though, oh, suddenly I'm craving for blood, or suddenly I want to hurt someone. Like, you wouldn't
yeah,
have those thoughts and desires if you're healthy psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. So yes,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Early Icelandic historian Snorri, I like this. Snorri Sturluson, who recorded Viking lore around 1200 CE, so Common Era, wrote about highly feared Vikings called Berserkers. Oh, I like this story, which means bear shirts. The warriors would don bearskin tunics for battle, in the belief that this would allow them to absorb the animal's strength and ferocity. The phrase going berserk still means wild and often violent behavior. And the advanced berserker didn't even have to be physically present on the battlefield to do his fearsome work. Some warriors were able to send forth a spirit double. Man, this sounds like a doppelganger, right? Almost.
Yeah.
That could assume the full appearance and fighting prowess, I don't know how to pronounce this, of a bear combined with the intelligence of a human. That's insane. That's almost like some shamanic slash druid work. While this was
Yeah.
occurring, yeah, the warrior's real body would lie in a state of deep sleep. Those who transformed themselves in this manner were also called Hamramir or
Wow,
Hamramr.
I had no idea about that. Well, that makes
Yeah.
me, that's kind of like an answer to angels taking on flesh too, maybe. I mean, maybe from the spirit realm they're projecting a fleshly
Yeah, it's like this
doppelganger.
because Vikings were pagans, so maybe with the help of their druids, call them whatever you want to call them, they were able to learn sort of an astral projection, leave their body and use it, but for the evil purposes. Or maybe
Yeah.
to us it sounds evil because they're always attacking. But let's say in a state of being defending your village, defending your settlement. I don't know, in
Yeah.
that case would it be evil, but it still makes me think it is, because your spirit is joining, or your soul is joining an animal. That
Yeah.
doesn't sound as something that God would condone. So it's still not something I would approve. But yeah, just like you said, I didn't know this last aspect. That's very interesting.
Yeah. It makes you wonder because it's kind of crossing boundaries that are forbidden. I think in the first Enoch story with the Watchers, one of the reasons they were condemned is because they crossed into a realm, the fleshly realm, that they were not allowed to, that God had forbid them to. And so part of their transgression was crossing forbidden boundaries. So in that case that you mentioned, I mean, that's kind of like Brandon Stark from Game of Thrones, where he projected himself into a crow and he could see everywhere, right? And that also reminds me of I just watched this documentary on Prime. It's called Third Eye Spies. Have you seen that? Dude, you
No.
have to watch this. It's like, it's about the so it's kind of like from Stranger Things, where Elle would project her thoughts and could see things going on around the world for a spy agency. They actually did that in the 70s and 80s with psychics. And the whole documentary is they're talking to the scientists that ran the program, and a lot of this stuff now is declassed because it was in the 70s, so they can talk about it. And it's about how all these the remote viewers could see like a key in a box in a military installation in Russia from the United States. And both sides were doing this. Russia was doing this, and the United States were doing this during the Cold War. And they were using their psychic powers to do remote viewing or spying. And I was just thinking, it's like, well, okay, so if they can do that and that's real, and you think about there's people who can like bend spoons with their mind and stuff, right? I mean, maybe not bend spoons, but maybe moves. Like there are people that can do kinetic, they can move things. And then you think about the phenomena of a poltergeist, and oftentimes a poltergeist is someone in the house that is in distress psychologically, is causing all the books to fly off the shelves and stuff like that, right? So there's definitely like a physical aspect to the spiritual psychological mesh. And I think that ties in with the cryptids, with the fleshly creatures, the preternatural, You need
Yeah,
to
thank
watch
you.
that documentary, dude. It is crazy.
Yeah, I will. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Cross reference.
It's like MK
Um,
Ultra.
wow. Yeah. You know what? When you were mentioning the Game of Thrones, I know how many Christians were like, ah. So I just wanted to quote that meme that comes from the TV show when they go in the town when the ladies go behind the queen and they say shame, 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 shame. So I just wanted to quote it for you, like shame on watching Game of Thrones. But I'm kidding. I watched the same show not because I like the political parts or like sexual stuff, but
Yeah.
just because I like dragons and swords. I'm like, I mean, I
Yeah.
like fantasy. What can you say?
Well, in full transparency, my wife and I had to stop watching it because it was so nasty. I mean, the
Yeah,
nasty parts were just unnecessary. They
yeah,
could have done that whole thing without all the nudity and all the extreme violence. But so I actually had to stop watching it because I feel like the spirit was convicting me that it was getting too nasty. But then I went back years later and finished it off and just fast forwarded through the nasty parts. And
yeah,
that's kind of like, I think, and we were talking about this the other day, I think, or maybe you were talking about with Doug about how different people are spiritually sensitive in different ways
yeah,
to different things. And it can bother you at even, I think, at a different time in your life than maybe when you're stronger later in life with your spirituality. Maybe it's easier to just look at and be like, okay, I'm going to skip past that. That's bad. And it doesn't bother you or it doesn't convict you in the same way because it's not affecting you. I don't know. But yeah, no, I'm with you. Game of Thrones was nasty sometimes. It was bad.
yeah. In one story from old Danish sagas, the Viking warrior Bothvar had done this very thing during a battle for the Danish king Hrolf, and lay fast asleep in a safe place as his bare double tore the enemy soldiers limb from limb. King Hrolf was unaware of the man's berserker's abilities and woke him up, thinking he was just sleeping on the job. That caused Boltvar's bear double to disappear, and without the bear's horrific battle presence, their enemies were able to rally.
I love that
Sabini,
story.
yeah, yeah,
It's a
and
good one.
honestly, to me, it doesn't look fake. It doesn't look fake at all.
Yeah.
Sabine Baring Joud, or something like
Bearing
that. It's
gold.
a French name. Okay, yeah.
Sabine bearing gold. Yeah.
Gould, a researcher and scholar who worked during the 19th century, showed that the Viking warriors also used wolfskins to engender um, battle rage and prowess, and that the word varg means wolf, and also became associated with those that turned into wolves. Okay, so now we have from bears to wolves. Okay, she
Hmm.
also goes into a great detail on the derivations and exact meanings of these terms, but suffice it to say that Northern Europeans widely believed these supernatural were animals existed. The Swedes, Norwegians, Danes, Finns, and others also entertained many varied superstitions about these creatures. About this, Baring Gould says that it may be accepted as an axiom that no superstition of general acceptance is destitute of a foundation of truth. To
Hmm.
her, that foundation of truth consisted of the psychological disorder of lycanthropy. He believed that eyewitnesses mistook the furious fits and madness displayed by its sufferers for magic. Hmm. Okay, that's interesting. Other authors, such as respected British researchers Jeanette and Colleen Board, suggested that the concept of the werewolf and most other unexplainable phenomena is based on actual observation of supernatural energy of one kind or another. Well, yeah, I
Hmm.
would partially agree. There is supernatural energy, but who is wielding
Mhm.
the supernatural energy? It's not just flying in the sky and you somehow, uh, I don't know, obtain it and you wield it. It has to be given to you by someone who is more powerful than you. In the
Mm.
same way,
Mhm.
we receive Holy Spirit, who is much more powerful than us. And the way
Mm.
we are able to resist the devil, the way we are able to do spiritual warfare, the way we pray or worship of anything is through that Spirit. So He's the one that gives
Mm.
us powers and abilities. Okay, I'm
Mm.
almost done with my part.
Okay.
The explanation most widely accepted today for the historic popularity of werewolves in Europe, however, is rooted in the fact that real wolves were once a rampant threat all over Europe. That's funny because my people think that they descended from wolves. I mean, that's one of the stories.
Oh
Like
wow.
I don't know how that happened to be the first belief, but we have such a complex pantheon and mythology. But yeah,
Wow.
wolves are like important. Wolves and oak trees, they're very important in our ancient lore of Serbian and in general Eastern European myth. Very
Yeah.
important, oak
Oh,
tree
that'd
and
be
wolf.
interesting to do an episode on that sometime. I'd
Yeah,
love to hear about that.
if I find someone who's well versed with these things, and we can find a
Mm,
scholarly book or something like that, yes.
that'd be
Uh,
cool.
Wolves were very common across the continent before the 20th century, and indeed more and more turned to eating domesticated animals and perhaps the occasional human as Europe's growing agricultural needs wiped out the predator's habitat. The poster canine for this dangerous meeting of people and wildlife is the notorious beast of Juvaudan or something like that, right?
Hmm.
Okay,
I'm gonna
so
go with that pronunciation. Jivedon. Jivedon.
yeah.